Hello children, welcome to AIMS India's online classes. This is biology session. You are watching Diversity of Living Organisms part 3. So in the part 2 we have come across some activities which helped us in understanding the observation of different characters in monocots and dicots, and we also studied with the help of activity diversity in animals, that is observation of external characters of insects, and the variation in animals external characters. Taking human beings as example, studied the height, weight, length of the forefinger, the thumb impression, palm length and width. Okay, we have seen the variations in animals. Now let us see how we could study the same in plants, variations in plants. Are you ready, children? Let us proceed. Variations in plants, the activity number 7. The variation in two different neem plants or neem trees. Okay, here you need to collect two small, almost equal sized neem plants from your surroundings and observe them carefully and fill the table. The table plant 1 and plant 2. Let us name it as plant 1 and plant 2. And you need to measure the height of the plant and number of leaves, the size or shape of the leaves, the color of the flowers, leaf venation. Okay, these are the few characteristic features you have to make a note. What differences could you find in the similar looking neem plants? Height variation, number of leaves variation, size and shape of the leaves variation, and color of the flower. Okay, flower may or may not be present, but the leaf and venation, they are same. Okay, so why do you think such differences are present in the nature? Definitely you need to think. So even in the human beings, even in your class also, the same aged people, there is a lot of variation in the height, variation in the thinking, variation in in every aspect there is variations. Okay, it depends on the plant 1, where it is growing, the habitat, the soil, the contents of the soil or the minerals or the fertility of the soil, and the plant 2. There are several factors which influence the growth, the size and shape of the plants. Okay, so if you consider human beings, this is also the nutrition plays very important role. Okay, so let us proceed. The presence of differences between the organisms of the same species, it is called variation. Okay, define variation. The presence of differences between the organisms of the same species is called variation. The variation between the different species is always greater than the variations within a species. Okay, if you take a banyan tree and a neem tree, there are many variations, many differences. Okay, here what we have done, we have considered the two neem plants, so the variations are very less. Okay, the variations between different species is always greater than the variations within a same species. So as we have observed so far, the variation forms a basis for selection of characters to group organisms. Okay, based on the variations only we can form a basis for the selection of characters to group the organisms. Okay, grouping organisms on the basis of certain characters which vary over populations, indicating some common linkage or common lineage of each varied group. Okay, so first observation. So after the observation, selection of the characters, then based on the characters you can group the organisms. Okay, so once again you can observe the characteristics of the two plants and make the note, then you can group those two in one category belongs to the neem plants. Okay, so need for a classification or need of classification. Why do we need classification? Let us imagine, or let us suppose, let us assume that there is no classification system. Then what happens? Definitely it will lead to a lot of confusion. There is no systematic study, isn't it? So there is a need of classification. The way in which the organism may have evolved is classification. Thus, the classification in biology is the systematic study of organisms present in nature with respect to their evolution. Okay, then what is the need of classification? The classification gives better knowledge and better understanding of organisms that are studied. Yes, it gives better knowledge and better understanding of the organisms that are studied. Classification helps to study the organisms in a proper and systematic manner. Yes, it's true. It helps in a proper and systematic study. Classification helps to make a comparison in an easier way. Definitely, it helps to make the comparison in an easier way. It helps in understanding the relationship among the organisms and their interdependence. Yes, it is the classification which helps in understanding the interdependence phenomenon between the organisms. The classification makes our study more focused and helps us to handle huge population of organisms. It helps, okay, it makes our study more focused and helps us to handle huge population of organisms. Finally, it gives us an idea. It gives us an idea of evolution. You know, evolution is not so simple. Okay, if you see the anthropological study of human beings, it has took several years, thousands of years. Okay, so the classification gives us an idea of evolution. Classification and evolution, they are closely related. All living things are identified and categorized on the basis of their structure and function. Okay, some basic characteristics are there in all living organisms. So all living things are identified and categorized on the basis of their structure and function. Some characteristics are likely to make more wide-ranging changes in body design than others. There is a role of time in this as well. Definitely, time plays a very important role. So, once a certain body design comes into existence, it will shape the effects of all other subsequent design changes. simply because it already exists. Okay. So in other words, characteristics that came into existence earlier are likely to be more basic than the characteristics that have come into existence later. So this means that the classification of life forms are closely related to their evolution. Evolution is a process. Okay. It is a systematic process. So the present multicellular organisms are evolved from the unicellular organisms. Okay, during the time of evolution. Evolution is a continuous process. Evolution is a continuous process. Evolution is a process of acquiring change. Most life forms that we see today had variations, changes that accumulated over years. Okay, children. Evolution is a process of acquiring change. So the most life forms that we see today had variations that accumulated over years. Next, the variations allow the organism possessing them to survive better. Charles Darwin is a famous scientist. Okay, first wrote about this evolution in his book. The book name is The Origin of Species. What is the book name? The Origin of Species. How nice the name is. In 1859, he wrote this book, The Origin of Species, written by Charles Darwin. When we connect the idea of evolution to classification, we find in some groups of organisms, the body designs have not changed over the years, while several organisms have acquired body designs relatively recently. Okay. So the knowledge of evolution is applicable to the classification. Since the complexity of design has increased over the years and is yet to increase, we may say that older organisms are simpler as compared to the younger organisms. The evolution has undergone a lot of changes. During the process of evolution, several changes took place. Okay. Now come to the history of classification. The history of classification in India. The classification had been the basis of studies in medicines and dates back to 1st and 2nd century AD. Okay. The Charaka and Sushruta had classified the plants on the basis of their medicinal importance, medicinal value, medicinal plants. Okay. The classification done by biologists till date. So thereafter, Charaka and Sushruta, Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita. So there are thereafter Parasar in his Vrikshayurveda, the book Vrikshayurveda, documented the classification system of several land plants for the first time. In his Parasar, in his Vrikshayurveda. So this classification mainly deals with the structure of the flowers. So let us study how the biologists from 16th century have been trying to classify diverse organisms so far. Okay, here the table is given. The first So this table gives, the following table shows how different biologists have gone about forming the first category in classification. Linnaeus in 1735, okay, he introduced the two kingdoms, okay, then not treated those two kingdoms. So Vegetabilia and Animalia, the two kingdoms introduced by Linnaeus are Vegetabilia and the Animalia. Next, Ernest Haeckel in 1866 he introduced the three kingdom classification. So what the difference between the two kingdom classification, three kingdom classification is? So here in two kingdom classification, Linnaeus didn't separate the organisms which show the diversity, neither belongs to the plant and neither belongs to animals. He included everything, divided the total living organisms into two kingdoms. But later, the Haeckel divided the total living organisms into three kingdoms, that is Protista, Plantae and Animalia. Later, Chatton in 1925, we entered into the 19th century, okay, 1925, two empires. He didn't call the kingdoms, he called it two empires, Prokaryota and Eukaryota. Prokaryota and Eukaryota. The Prokaryota includes primitive organisms and Eukaryota includes multicellular higher organisms. Later on, after Chatton, Copeland 1938, he introduced a four kingdoms classification. According to him, the four kingdoms are Monera, Protoctista, Plantae and Animalia. Okay, what are the four kingdoms introduced by the Copeland? Monera, Protoctista, Plantae, Animalia. So it has undergone the change again. In 1969, Whittaker, he introduced the five kingdom classification. This is the well accepted, the most accepted classification, followed for a long time. What is the five kingdom classification of Whittaker's? The five kingdoms are Monera, Protista, Plantae, Fungi and Animalia. Okay, so he separated the fungi. Next, Woese et al. In 1990, he introduced three kingdoms by name Bacteria, Archaea and Eukarya. This is also the well accepted classification. And after him, finally in 1998, Cavalier Smith, in 1998, he introduced a six kingdoms classification. According to him, bacteria, protozoa, chromista, Plantae, fungi, Animalia. These are the six kingdoms. Okay, so the classification done by the biologists till date, it has undergone several changes, several considerations, modifications, keeping evolutionary changes in mind. Okay, the classification has undergone a lot of change. Okay, then although the biologists in the 16th century and 17th centuries did not recognize that the similarities and differences among the organisms were consequences of evolutionary mechanisms, they still sought a means to organize biological diversity. Okay, so there is a biological diversity. Okay. In 1758, Carl Linnaeus, this is the famous person who is called the father of taxonomy. In 1758, Carl Linnaeus proposed a system that has dominated classification for centuries. Linnaeus gave organisms, each organism with two names, denoting genus, species. Genus, species. Actually, in 1751 only, Linnaeus coined the term systematics. He coined the term systematics. It can be defined as the science that deals with the diversity of organisms and all their comparative and evolutionary relationships. What is the term systematic meaning? It defines as the science that deals with the diversity of organisms and all their comparative and evolutionary relationships. Okay, this is given according to the Simpson 1961. The systematics include four main aspects, that is identification, classification, nomenclature and taxonomy. Okay, systematics is equal to identification plus classification plus nomenclature plus taxonomy. Okay, now we are calling this is a famous man, Carolus Linnaeus. Okay, now we are calling it as the taxonomy is the science of classification. Okay, the binomial nomenclature given by Linnaeus is the naming. It is the naming system in which the name of species consisting of two words, out of which the first generic name written with the initial capital letter and the second species name written with initial small letter. Okay, for example, you can take Homo sapiens, human beings, the scientific name. H starts with the capital letter. Homo is the genus. Sapiens, S-A-P-I-E-N-S. Sapiens means the species name. Homo sapiens stands for human beings. Okay. The term new systematics, it is also called as biosystematics. Julian Huxley in 1940 he introduced the concept of biosystematics, the concept which brings out the taxonomic affinity on the basis of evolutionary, genetical and morphological traits, means characteristics. Morphological means external, genetical means internally, genes. Traits means characteristics. Okay, that's why the taxonomy is the branch of science that deals with the laws and principles of classifying the organisms. Each step represents a taxonomic category. Linnaeus is known as father of taxonomy. The taxonomy may be divided into two main categories: classical taxonomy or old taxonomy, and the modern taxonomy or new taxonomy. There are two. Okay, more we are going to study. Okay, I hope you understood. Please read the textbook. Thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe the channel and press the bell icon for receiving latest updates.